What is it about Great Britain and its gardens that stir our hearts each spring?
Welcome to the Garden Angeles, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana, where I have a suburban garden measured in square feet.
And I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma, where I garden on several acres out in the country.
We call ourselves Garden Angeles because we are evangelists for gardening. We love gardening and we want others to love it too.
Yes, we do, and we aren't afraid to spill the beans and tell all of our gardening secrets, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. But that's enough of who, what, when, where. Let's move on to this week's episode. Hello, Carol. How does your garden grow?
Hello, Dee. It grows quite well after a few very, very frosty, freezing mornings. It is warmed up the last few days, and the garden is getting ready to explode.
Awesome. That sounds great.
So the woodland tulips, you know, those beautiful yellow sort of lily-looking things. The first two bloomed yesterday, and so those are going to be going wild. That's Tulipa sylvestris. I love those. I've been out in the vegetable garden this morning. I've got the kale and lettuce and beets and turnip seeds sown. I'm ready to put sweet peas in. They're soaking now.
Wow.
Spring is here.
Spring is in Indiana. And in Oklahoma,
you betcha,
it's a whole nother thing. We're a month ahead of you. So I worked all weekend in the garden. I even bought Easter brisket so I didn't have to cook. I took all of the pelargoniums out of my greenhouse, even though it's a little early, folks. I've looked at the weather and I think we're okay. I repotted several transplants of shishito peppers and tomatoes. And the big thing I did on the Saturday before Easter was I went out and did all of my containers on the deck. I mean, I planted all of them, which took about 6 flats of different plants. And then on top of that, I've got to buy a few more flowers because I just don't have quite enough.
Wow. And so we are not planting containers in Indiana and points north. It is still risky to put things that do not tolerate frost outside unless you're willing to drag them all back inside every time it gets close to freezing. We're still in pansy and viola season.
Right, and we're at the end of pansy and viola season, and my actual freeze date is April 20th, but I think we're fine. I really do, because I've looked at it. Southern Oklahoma is about April 10th, so it's 10 days, depending on where you're in Oklahoma.
I'm a month behind you.
You are.
Speaking of repotting seedlings, I did thin out some seedlings that I have for petunias and salvias that I'm growing from seed. I got those from All America Selections. And I was thinking about how thinning things out, thinning seedlings is something that new gardeners just get all kind of verklempt over.
Yeah, a lot of my clients will say, could you just do it for me? And I say, I'll do the first row or the first set, and then you do the rest. You're not killing your children. You're just making sure that some of the seeds will actually turn into big plants, and that's important.
It is, and I planted Nicotiana, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny
Oh my
seed,
gosh, yeah.
and a tiny, tiny, tiny seedling, and I have like scads of them to carefully prick out because I just want to leave like one in each container.
Right. I actually broadcast those in like takeout containers, and then I went in and thinned them first. And then I let them go ahead and be a little crowded, and then I pricked them out and transplanted them into big pots. And they're doing really well. In fact, I will set them out this week.
Very nice. Mine cannot go out for another, I don't know, not until May 10th at the very, very earliest. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see how your weather does, just like we'll see how ours does. So you have a quote for us.
I do. The quote is, people go through 5 stages of gardening. They begin by liking flowers, progress to flowering shrubs, then autumn foliage and berries, and next they go for leaves, and finally the underneath of the leaves. That was Deborah Mitford in All in One Basket. She said that her father-in-law would say that. And we're going to talk about Deborah later, so we won't give away who exactly she was.
Debo. That was
Debo.
her nickname.
Nine was her other family nickname.
Yeah, that family had a lot of nicknames.
Yes.
So we're going to start out by talking about, this whole episode is about Great Britain because, well, we like Great Britain, so we talk about it whenever we can. And the first thing we're going to talk about are the British National Flower Collections and why they fascinate us. They talk about this all the time on Gardener's World.
They do. And I looked it up, and there's actually a website, and they talk about, and it's the Plant Heritage website. And the national collections, they have 650 national collections containing, they estimate, 95,000 plants.
Talk about crazy plant collectors. I think all gardeners go through plant collections. Like for the example, this year, apparently I have the Nicotiana collection because I'm growing 3 types, which is crazy. But I think put simply, a national plant collection is a registered and documented collection of a group of plants. These can be linked botanically by plant group or perhaps a shared history or geography. And that's a quote, isn't it, from that website?
That is from the website where you can go and search out these collections. And all the collections in Great Britain have to be made available to view by appointment or on special days or part of a garden open day to the public, so people can go in and see them. And anybody can be an owner of a plant collection, and certain criteria that they have, and then they can get it registered and all that kind of good stuff. But it's really part of a whole conservation effort to kind of keep some of these, especially older varieties, going. So that's one of the reasons. It's not just because people are obsessed, but it is also because people are obsessed.
It's both. And so that's pretty amazing. And plants, I guess they decided that they were so obsessed about it that they would make sure that the plants are part of a registered conservation scheme. I love how they call everything a scheme. They have a national garden scheme. There's a lot of things that the word scheme must mean something different there than it does here. But they want them to be a resource for generations to come, which might be why you can find your perennial violas because somebody kept a plant collection alive, because they are not common.
Well, survey says that the viola collection that they have is related to a different species. It's called the Viola odorata collection and the Parmas.
Which means scented.
Yes. And these were I call them traditionally looking violets, very long stems that they often put into nosegays and things. These are not these are not the perennial pansies that I am freaked on. They just have those 2.
Well, and they wouldn't grow here in Oklahoma. Those grow really well in Great Britain because of their climate. They do not grow well in Oklahoma. No. The ones with the long stems that you put in nosegays. Maybe they grow well up in the, Pacific Northwest. It has a similar climate.
Well, I looked up geranium collections, and there are 4, but they are the true geraniums. And I did not look up pelargoniums, but I know people have pelargonium collections separate. Tons of them, probably.
They do. And
last year I wanted to have a trifolium collection, which is clovers. Nobody has a clover collection over there.
You could be the official clover collector if you wanted to be.
I can only find like 3 or 4 different varieties, so I think that one's kind of limited. I don't think that one would qualify.
You also wanted to be the Tagetes collection.
Yeah, but so things like Taget.
We should say what Tagetes are.
It's marigolds. And the thing about like marigolds, zinnias, I'd put echinacea in that class. I'd put petunias in the class. There is so much breeding going on. There is no way to have the collection if you're trying to have like everything. Like take petunias. How many bazillion types of petunias are there?
There's lots, because when we were out at the, what was that thing I did cast, California Spring Trials, I was like, oh my gosh, we saw so many petunias. Every greenhouse smelled like petunias. By the end of it, I was sick of petunias, although now I'm kind of in love with them again, because I got to see all those futuristic ones, like Night Sky and all those, and I really love those.
Right. The way to have a petunia collection is you'd have to say, okay, I'm going to collect petunia varieties that existed before 1960 or something crazy like that. And that's really a conservation effort to keep those old varieties going. So that's what you would do for petunias. So go ahead, Dee, because you're back in love with them.
I'm not that in love. I'm okay. I don't have time for that. I have too much garden to keep track of and too many clients to help. So there you go. Shall I do the next? Are we through with the collections? I'm through with them.
I wanted to say one more thing. They have an annual award they give out, the Malcolm Farrow Brickle Award. And last year it went to somebody, Matt Brewer, who was a head gardener at Marwood, which I've never heard of, for his Astilbe collection.
Right. And Oklahomans, it's hard to grow Astilbe here. So you probably just don't want to do that. So shall I do the quote? The oddest of all is the radish called French breakfast. I have never seen a Frenchman tucking into radishes for his petit déjeuner, but that's what they would have you believe. Deborah Mitford in All in One Basket. I have got to read Debo's book.
So that is one of several books she wrote. And Dee, we'll get to this in a minute, and why I have quotes from that book.
I know why. Okay, so we're going to talk in this section about hardening off seedlings because we got a question from a listener who works full time. And boy, that's true. That makes it hard to harden off your seedlings. So I think if you leave every day for work, it is tricky. What do you think, Carol?
It is. And I used to leave every day for work before it was even light out and before it got decent enough to put seedlings out. So I would have to do it on Saturday and Sunday as best I could, put them out on Saturday morning in the shade, Sunday morning in the shade. And then during the week, if I would get home early enough, and often I didn't, but if I could get home early enough, I might put them out a little bit in the evening and just kind of keep taking them in and out. If I could see it was going to be a really good day, I might put them out in the shade. But I would want to make sure it wasn't a really hot day because they can dry out really fast.
Yeah, because of the wind too. So you're fine, at least in my part of the world. March and April are our windiest months in the state of Oklahoma and Texas, probably too. And so if you live in the South, I would say start them on the weekends, put them out for a few hours in the shade. Notice that we keep saying the word shade here, okay? Because everything that you read online, in magazines, and in some books will say, oh yeah, just stick them out for an hour in the sun. Well, if you stick them out for an hour in the sun in my climate, they will be dried out sadness, and they will have those patches of kind of yellow on the leaves where they've thinned out because they're not used to the sun. So I always harden off in the shade until the very end. Like once I've finally got them to where I think they're hardened off and can go out in the garden, then I might let them out in the sun a little bit, but mostly I use the shade, and people are really surprised when I tell them that. And I would do that if I were working too. And I hadn't thought about the fact that it would be really hard because you leave early in the morning before it's light or before it's warm, and then you get back when it's sometimes barely light. If you, at least in my part of the world, I don't know about yours, Carol, is the sun the same for you? Our sun is about 8 p.m. now. Sunset.
Ours is a little bit later, and the reason why is Indiana people think we're on Central Time. We're on Eastern Time. And so we are pretty far west for Eastern Time. So right now, I could look, and I think our sunset is, I'll say well after 8 p.m.
Yeah, I think ours is at 8 p.m. right now. So I think you could come home in the evenings and you could put them outside if you can remember to bring them back in because you don't want to leave them out overnight. And you could set them out in the sun then because the sun isn't as strong. But the thing is when you set seedlings out, be sure and put it on your phone, a timer, a reminder, so that you bring them back in. Because I promise you, I've left them out there and forgotten them before. The good news is if you forget them in the shade, they aren't as likely to dry out and turn to nothing. And also water them before you put them out. So what I used to do is drag them out of my area where I had my lighted table, my great big lighted thing. I would take them outside out that door. It's always good to have it near a door so that you can get them in and out. I'd haul them outside, set them in the shade, water everybody with the hose gently, and then I would bring them all back in after their time out in the shade.
And Dee, I'm looking, I got this new app. Thanks for asking about sunrise and sunset. I got this new app called Magic Hour, and it tells you when sunrise begins and when sunset begins. So our sunset goes from 8:13 today until 8:41, so it won't be completely dark until 20 of 9.
Okay. So that here it'll be dark around 8. At least I don't have that up, but now I want it.
Yeah, and it won't be completely light until 7:58 a.m. Sunrise starts around 6:55 a.m. So
Yeah. I think
people that are morning people hate that we have this daylight savings time. But by the middle of July, I mean, it'll be light at 10 o'clock at night.
yeah, it's light here at 9. So that makes sense because we're on Central Standard Time. Okay, we hope that helped you. I don't know, what else do you have to say about hardening off seedlings?
I don't have much to say about hardening off seedlings, but I will say that the later hours of sunlight in Indiana is very nice for people who work, or for people who have our next topic, which is they go to a community garden, or as they say in Great Britain, an allotment, because they have more time in the evening with daylight to go garden when they have to pack up all the tools and the plants and go to another place.
Right.
And that's a big thing in Great Britain. They're kind of well, they're obviously landlocked, but people do not have the kind of suburban yards that you and I have. They have those little tiny things behind their houses. And so many of them they go to allotment gardens where they actually do their gardening.
Right. Well, I will say this, it depends on where you live in Great Britain, but yes, the majority of people live in the city. And if you live in the city, various cities, then you have little row houses, and a lot of them are Victorian, and they were put up during Victoria's reign, I assume. And so they have little yards, which they actually call gardens. And actually the word yard comes from garden, but we digress.
We digress. But anyway, so people wait for years on lists to get into allotments. And then I think people in Great Britain, when they have an allotment garden, they do a ton of gardening there. And it's not just food, but in the United States, you think about community gardens. And I think of two kinds. There's the kind where you have your own plot and people go and grow food. And then there's a community garden where everybody kind of pitches in and has one gigantic garden that everybody helps with, and then everybody shares in the produce.
Exactly. And they do similar things here with the community gardens.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about here, the community gardens.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking still about the allotments.
No, I switched topics.
But that's my bad, because I looked at my sunrise and sunset while you were talking. Sorry.
That's okay.
My sunrise starts at 7:21, and my sunset, it starts at 7:55, and it ends at 8:21. So not so different from yours.
No, not so different. But you're pretty far west in Central Time when you think about it.
Yes, we are, which makes a difference. Yeah, that's true.
So I'm going to leave 2 links in our show notes. I'm going to leave a link to an organization called communitygarden.org, which is a United States-based organization, and they talk about putting together community gardens for people, and that's a very useful resource. And then I'm also going to put a link to a British Heritage article about allotment gardening in Great Britain, and they talk about there are like 1/3 allotments in Great Britain, and they cover 28,000 acres, which I think is pretty big. So we'll put those.
That's amazing.
We'll put those for people who would like to get more information about that. And maybe some of our listeners actually garden in a community garden or an allotment and want to tell us about it. They can just hit the link to send us an email.
They sure can. Now,
Nature's
you're going to
quite
do
a
our next
nuisance,
quote.
but when it works, it's wonderful. And that is by the current Duke of Devonshire. Notice how I pronounce that British way instead of the American. Instead of Devonshire, I said Devonshire.
You did it right.
That's because I've watched
You did good.
all the episodes of The Treasures of Chatsworth House, which is the ancestral home of the Dukes of Devonshire.
Right. But are you going to do that next, or are you going to do your bookshelf next?
I'm going to do the bookshelf. And so I put this one on here, and it's a book called The Last Garden in England by Julia Kelly. And this is something different because this is a novel that came out I guess it was either this year or last year, maybe last year. But it's about a British garden, and kind of reminded me of the whole, British estates, and they have these big, glorious, beautiful gardens, and they often had bunches of people that worked on them. And so this garden it's a historical novel, Takes place in around early 1900s with the original garden designer. And then there's characters in World War II times. And then there are current day. And so it kind of morphs from the start of the garden and that person's story. And it was actually designed by a woman. And then the transition of what happened to the garden in World War II. And then the restoration of the garden in current day and the discoveries that they make that kind of ties everything together. So it's a very good book if people like historical fiction and they like novels and they like gardens and they like Great Britain. It hits all those buttons. Also World War II history.
It hits all the notes.
All the notes.
So, and it follows the history of many state gardens, especially in Great Britain, because during World War I, they lost almost all of their staff.
Right.
And then that really, and they also started being taxed. And it just changed the entire, I mean, all of Great Britain's social class was changed by World War I, and then it was changed again by World War II. And so, fascinating stuff. I read a series of books. They're by Charles Todd, which are set after World War I. And he's an inspector who goes around trying to figure out different crimes. And I think we're in like 1928 now. And it's that same idea where the whole world changed. And so that happened for all of these houses, including what our dirt is about.
Our dirt is about.
Which is so nice. It's so nice how this all worked out, because I looked up our dirt and then you looked up our other stuff. So you looked up the other part. So that was interesting.
So our dirt is about the Dowager Duchess of Devonshire. I don't think if I said Dowager.
It's a dowager.
Dowager Duchess of Devonshire, which was Deborah Mitford, the youngest of the Mitford sisters. And you could go on a whole tangent about the Mitford sisters.
Oh my gosh.
Which we will not do. But she was the youngest. They called her Debo. Her one sister, Nancy, the famous writer, called her 9, said that she basically was like a 9-year-old her whole life.
She was a very successful 9-year-old, if that's true. I mean, of the sisters,
well,
she made a lot of really good decisions about her property and all of that kind of stuff. But she did love animals and she loved gardens and she liked being outdoors. She is. I just thought she was great.
Oh, she's fascinating. And so I thought, why are we going to talk about this Duchess of Devonshire? And so, Dee, thank you very much. I have been through countless YouTube videos about Chatsworth House. I have read the book All in One Basket by Deborah Mitford, the Duchess of Devonshire. So I read that, and then I need to go get, that wasn't even her memoir. I got to go get her memoir, which is called Wait for Me, because she was the youngest of 7, and she was always, wait for me. But early in her life, fascinating life, she was not destined to be the Duchess when she married Andrew. He was the younger brother, the older brother, who, by the way, married Kathleen Kennedy, sister of Jack Kennedy, or John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He died in World War II. He was shot by a sniper in Belgium. And so suddenly Andrew, the younger brother, and Deborah become the Duke and the Duchess when his father died. But anyway, so she has known a lot of people. And
yeah, she had one sister who was a fascist. And then she had the other sister who was like on the opposite end of things. I mean, really, they were an interesting group of women. So they're fascinating in and of themselves. But I have to say that Debo fit Carol and I the best.
Yes, because she loved the gardens. And the thing I think she did is when she and her husband inherited Chatsworth House, which was the home of the Dukes of Devonshire, and all the other properties, they owed a tremendous amount of death tax to the government. And it took them 17 years to clear the debt.
And they paid it off. And they made money.
They had to sell some things off. Yes. But she really worked to make the Chatsworth a destination place. People would come, pay money. She started a shop. She had a tea room. And they welcomed like 600,000 visitors a year. And if you listen to her son, the current Duke, they love it. They love having all the guests. They love living at Chatsworth House. They love all their collections. They love their art. Have you been there, Dee?
I have not been to Chatsworth, but now I've got to go when I go back. And I've got to look up exactly where Devonshire, I've never been to Devonshire. I've been to the other parts of England, so I've got to go. I thought what was interesting is that she is credited with creating the house as a tourist destination, and in a classy way, because she had all of these artisans and craftspeople who worked on the farm, because these are big farms. And so she started showing their work, and she started remodeling inside the house and doing all the things that they needed to do to take care of the house. And she would actually do videos and all kinds of things to show the craftspeople's work. And so she changed how people felt about the houses and how they saw them as a great heritage, which is not unlike their national collections. I mean, Great Britain has more great houses than almost anywhere I can think of. And so it's really, I just think she's charming and funny and witty. And I'm really glad that we looked at it. Yeah. I noticed on here that you found that Lancelot Capability Brown redesigned the landscape for the fourth Duke of Devonshire. And this was in the 1750s and 1765. So it probably took him 15 years or more to do it. I have been to a Capability Brown landscape before. They're very green, sweeping green hills, that's kind of thing. But I've not been to this one.
Right.
So very cool.
But the fun thing that's really known at Chatsworth House and Garden is their water feature. And there was another landscape architect in the 1800s that got hired by another duke. I don't know which duke it was.
It says sixth on here in your notes, but whoever that is.
Yeah. So Joseph Paxton became the head gardener in 1826, and he did the water feature, and it's all gravity fed.
Yeah.
And I watched this video, and I'll have to go back and find this video and put a link. But they showed the guy at the top of the property. I mean, we're talking thousands of acres. They pull this thing out, and it lets water from the lake go down this pipe, and then it goes down through these steps.
And trills and rills. Yeah, I've seen this video. It is cool.
By the time they get to the fountain, there's like a half-inch pipe or whatever, and so the water is under such pressure that it shoots up like 276 feet in the air. And the current Duke says they have to be careful when they turn on the fountain because it can drench everybody within sight
That's
of
funny.
it.
That's funny. So they now have this big RHS flower show, and it was successful. And so the water features are still gravity fed. That's just really, really cool.
It is cool. And so put this on your bucket list, Dee. I never thought it'd be on my bucket list, but I kind of would go to England to go see Chatsworth House.
There are so many great places to go see in England. When you finally go, you'll love it. It's easy to travel there too.
I would recommend All in One Basket. It's a great read. It's actually two of her books combined into one. And go out to YouTube and do a search for her. There's tons of videos out there. Do a search for Chatsworth House. And, get sucked in like I did. You can ask me anything, Dee. I've seen the video.
Well, what's funny about this, our listeners, is that I put this up here last week. She did all of this in 1 week. Like, she watched all the videos. I watched one video on her. And I had seen something that I thought was interesting about it. And so I sent it to her. And at first she was like, nah, I'm not interested. And I go, no, really, this lady's really interesting. You should go look it up. Next thing I know, she's read 2 of her books. And she's watched all the videos on her and the house.
Yeah. And then obsessive. I tagged 3 more books to read. So, yeah, thanks a lot, Dee. I don't really have time for all this.
No, whatever.
Let's do our garden commissions. So mine is, I've got to get the weeding done in the vegetable garden. There's henbit everywhere. Mm-hmm. I'm going to fuss over my little seedlings, and who knows what else trouble I'll get into. But I mowed the grass for the first time last week. I already said that, I think. But I'll probably have to mow the grass in front. The back still has flowers in the lawn, so I'm not mowing it yet.
We're not mowing the grass here yet because we're trying to let all of the clover grow up for the bees. And also here we want the henbit in our yard because that's a really early honeybee source of nectar. and also the dandelions. Even though bees are not, it's not their primary source, they do get a lot of pollen from dandelions. And so I let them all grow with abandon and could care less because I live out in the country and that's one of the great joys.
Thank you, Dee. That's going to be my new excuse. So the hen bit in the garden, which when my family came over to do an Easter egg hunt in the backyard, they're like, oh, my sister says, oh, Aunt Carol has more weeds than I do. Thanks a lot.
You can tell them it's not a contest that you're feeding the bees. You're welcome.
Thank you, Dee. I appreciate that. Anyway, what's your commission?
I am going to keep on repotting up a few seedlings. I'm going to go ahead and set out some flowers, including my Nicotiana, because we got those little beds. We got the hoses in them with the drip hose. So that's done. And what else am I going to do? Oh, buy a few more flowers for my pots because I have a couple that I still want to put some flowers around. Just tidy up and finish up some things. I do need to make a repair underneath my bricks in my potager. I have a leak in my watering system, which I'm getting ready to call an irrigation specialist to come over and fix it. But Bill and I could fix it if we just sit down and do it. And that's about it.
Well, that's quite a bit, actually. The season has begun. No more sitting around reading books about Deborah Mitford. Well, we can sit around and read books about Deborah Mitford, as I have shown. Anyway, we want to thank everyone for listening to The Garden Angelist. If you like our podcast, please tell your friends about us. Also, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything.
And if you listen to Apple Podcasts, we'd love a 5-star review. That helps us get noticed by others. Could you also share our podcast with your friends? Word of mouth is still the best way to get the word out there.
Yes, and be sure and check out our show notes for links for more information about today's topics, plus links to our own websites. And if you want to help support us, use the affiliate links. If you buy something after clicking through on them, we earn a small commission and it costs you nothing.
It was lovely to chat with all of you over the garden gate today. Bye until next week.
Bye.